A glittering gala turns deadly when the clock strikes 12, and every masked guest hides a motive. Welcome to Mystery Parlour. I am your host, Axen. Before we begin, share where you're tuning in from tonight. Your presence truly means a lot. Now, into the mystery. It was widely felt in Flaxford, a market town pleased to think itself both cultured and modestly exempt from the sillier enthusiasms of larger places, that a midnight gala was pushing things a bit. Midnight, after all, was a time generally reserved for the private rituals of sleeping couples, feverish infants, and the occasional insomniac postmaster fretting over stamp shortages. Yet the Borough Council, nudged by the new chair of events, Mrs. Lavinia Spindlethorpe, had insisted that a gala held at such an unconventional hour would inject vigor into the cultural timetable. Whatever vigor there was took the form of fairy lights, which failed to twinkle after the first half hour. A small orchestra composed mostly of retired railwaymen, and a long buffet table laid with items which had clearly been introduced to one another only minutes before. Egg and cress sandwiches, quivering blancmange, and a lone vol au vent attempting to appear continental. The venue, the assembly rooms, had been decorated in a manner Mrs. Spindlethorpe termed continental chic, and most others termed rather a lot of drapery for a Thursday. At 5 minutes to midnight, the building hummed with a largely good-natured mixture of anticipation, mild confusion, and the faintly medicinal smell of the Earl's patent carpet polish, applied earlier in what the caretaker described as a reckless quantity. In this atmosphere of cheerful disorientation, no one paid much immediate attention to the small, polite cough that issued from the dais, just as the town bell chimed the hour. Nor did anyone take much notice of the chair of events herself, at least not until she swayed gently, like a ship coming to harbour, and collapsed across the lectern with a soft thwop that sent her speech fluttering to the ground like neglected confetti. A distinct silence followed. The orchestra, which had just struck the first note of a lively number from The Merry Widow, petered out with apologetic squeaks. At the rear of the room, a late arrival, mistaking the silence for ceremony, began hesitant applause, which he quickly abandoned upon being nudged by his wife. At first, many assumed that Mrs. Spindlethorpe had succumbed to enthusiasm, or perhaps to the sherry punch she had praised throughout the evening with evangelical zeal. It was only when Mr. Lionel Phibb, town solicitor and part-time first aider, in the sense that he once read a handbook, approached the fallen chair and announced in a trembling baritone that something is decidedly wrong, that the gathering moved from curiosity to alarm. Within moments, the crowd rippled with speculation. Someone insisted they had seen a wasp. Another swore the vol au vent had looked suspicious from the outset. A third, more politically minded attendee murmured darkly about Sleaford radicals attempting to disrupt Flaxford's cultural renaissance. Standing near the front, hat in hand, as if attending a rather formal christening, was Detective Inspector Walter Purbright of the Flaxford Police. Invited as a courtesy, and perhaps out of Mrs. Spindlethorpe's hope that he might lend the proceedings an air of dignified authority, he now observed with the gentle concentration of a man noting the curious habits of a rare bird. Purbright was tall in the manner of a lamp-post lovingly installed in the wrong place. His expression, mild and thoughtful, conveyed neither surprise nor alarm, merely a patient readiness to let the situation reveal its own character. Mrs. Spindlethorpe, alas, did not recover her own. Even before the ambulance arrived, it was clear she had departed the gala with far greater haste than intended, permanently and without consulting the program. A death in Flaxford was not in itself extraordinary, but a death during a midnight gala, already a subject of strong opinion, and one involving a woman with no known ailments beyond a fondness for municipal influence. Now that was another matter entirely. As the crowd shifted toward the exits, whispering urgently and with the eagerness of those who sense a fine tale forming, Purbright bent to retrieve the fallen speech. He scanned its opening lines, which were as full of adjectives as Mrs. Spindlethorpe had been of civic enthusiasm. He folded the paper neatly, tucked it into his pocket, and straightened. "Inspector," murmured Sergeant Love, who had materialized at his side with the quiet efficiency of a well-trained sheepdog. "Should we begin taking names?" Purbright shook his head gently. "I think, Love," he said with mild deliberation, "we shall have no difficulty in obtaining names. They will, I expect, be presented to us tomorrow, along with theories, recollections, suspicions, grievances, and perhaps one or two confessions to matters entirely unrelated." Love looked at the receding crowd, many of whom were already leaning together like conspirators in an operetta. "Yes, sir," he said. "People do seem very interested." "In Flaxford," Purbright replied. "It would be considered discourteous not to take an interest." He glanced once more toward the dais, where Mrs. Spindlethorpe lay beneath a borrowed coat that had been draped with more ceremony than accuracy. A peculiar and understated death, occurring in a town that rarely did anything quietly. Purbright exhaled gently through his nose. "It appears," he said, "that the gala has produced an item of rather more significance than the committee intended." And with that unhurried remark, spoken as though he were merely noting a change in the weather, the machinery of quiet investigation began to turn. By 9 o'clock the following morning, the Midnight Gala had grown in significance until it almost rivaled the great bus diversion of 1987. Flaxford, which usually preferred its disturbances neatly scheduled and quickly forgotten, woke early in order to discuss the previous night with what it felt was proper gravity. At the police station, the atmosphere was quieter, but more purposeful. Inspector Purbright sat at his desk, considering the recovered copy of Mrs. Spindlethorpe's speech. The pages were creased and heavily underlined, as though the borough's cultural horizon needed physical pressure to rise. "It is with inexpressible pleasure," he read, "that I introduce Flaxford's first Midnight Gala, an event poised to illuminate the cultural horizon of our town and to inaugurate a new era of communal splendor." He laid the paper aside carefully, as one might set down a musical instrument which had been enthusiastically overplayed. "Do you think it was her heart, sir?" he asked, "with all that rushing about?" "That was Dr. Swithin," he said. "He has completed his preliminary examination." "Yes, sir." Love leaned forward hopefully. "The late Mrs. Spindlethorpe," Purbright said, "did not die of anything he is happy to call natural. There are signs of a toxic substance. He hopes shortly to identify its exact character, provided his apparatus can be persuaded to cooperate." "We may use the word privately," Purbright replied. "It appears someone took advantage of last night's festivities to contribute rather more than a raffle prize." "Then it must have been someone at the gala. She was perfectly all right when we saw her arrive." "People said so." "In Flaxford," said Purbright. "People often say so. Nevertheless, the timing is suggestive. A public event, but a limited invitation. For once, we begin with a list of possible murderers already written out for us." He rose, reached for his hat, and folded the speech into his pocket. "To Mr. Spindlethorpe," Purbright said. "Bereavement tends to make people talkative. Sometimes, by good fortune, they talk about the subject one has in mind. The Spindlethorpe residence, a semi-detached house of neat brick and determined tidiness, had drawn its curtains to the proper degree of mourning, enough to hint at sorrow, but not so much as to suggest that neighbors might be excluded from it. The front garden, all right angles and obedient shrubs, looked exactly as one would expect the late chair of events to have ordered it. Mr. Harold Spindlethorpe opened the door with the politeness of a man who suspected that whatever came next would be either official or expensive. He was thin, grey, and gave the impression of having been carefully stacked at the back of his own life. "Terrible business, Inspector?" he said, leading them into a parlour furnished entirely with upright chairs. Lavinia was so looking forward to last night. She said it was to be her legacy. Purbright's eyes travelled along the walls, where framed certificates and photographs bore witness to his late wife's progress through practically every committee the town could devise. "Your wife," he observed, "seems to have been active in most branches of public life." "She believed in service," Mr. Spindlethorpe said. "She thought people needed direction. Leave them alone and standard slip, she always said. She liked things done properly." "She hadn't been ill lately, sir?" he asked. "No fainting fits or anything of that sort?" "Not at all," said Mr. Spindlethorpe. "A little tired from all the arrangements, perhaps. But she was careful, hardly drank, never smoked, kept lists of what she'd eaten. She planned to see Flaxford into a better future." "Not at all," said Mr. Spindlethorpe. "A little tired from all the arrangements, perhaps. But she was careful, hardly drank, never smoked, kept lists of what she'd eaten. She planned to see Flaxford into a better future." "Well, there were a few who didn't always agree," he admitted. "The librarian hated the late opening. Councillor Judd said the gala was an extravagance. The vicar thought dancing after 11 bordered on frivolity. But Lavinia said opposition was the price of leadership." "Had she received any letters or telephone calls that upset her recently?" he asked. "Anything anonymous, for example?" There was a brief silence. Even the mantel clock seemed to reconsider its next tick. "There was a letter," Mr. Spindlethorpe said at last, "about a fortnight ago. No name or address. Lavinia said it was spite and tore it up. She told me not to encourage it by talking." "Only the first line," Mr. Spindlethorpe replied. "It said, 'You think you run this town, but you'll be stopped.' I thought it very rude." "Did she keep any piece of it?" Purbright said. "No. She tore it across and threw it in the kitchen bin." "Do you think it has something to do with what happened?" "It may have nothing to do with anything," Purbright answered gently. "But in a town of this size, even what is thrown away may prove enlightening." He rose, expressed conventional regrets, and followed Love back to the street. "Do you think that letter's important, sir?" he asked. "It interests me," Purbright said. "Someone felt strongly enough to buy paper, trouble a pen, and deny themselves the comfort of a signature. That suggests more than a passing irritation. So we're looking," he said, "for somebody who resented her running things." "In Flaxford, Love," Purbright replied, glancing along the row of orderly houses. "That description covers rather a lot of people. Our task will be to discover which of them decided to express resentment in chemical form." Love looked down the street, where curtains stirred with delicate curiosity, and scratched his ear. Somewhere behind one of those windows, he reflected, somebody was congratulating themselves on having carried out a most superior piece of mischief. It seemed a pity, in a way, that the police could not applaud such industry before discouraging it. Purbright, watching him, allowed himself the faintest of smiles and began, in his unhurried fashion, to sort Flaxford into those who disliked the deceased most. Purbright and Love made their way back toward the station on foot, for the air was crisp and the inspector seemed to favor walking when ideas invited themselves politely, rather than arriving with the commotion of an ambulance. Love matched his pace with an anxious diligence, aware that Purbright's silence meant he was thinking, and equally aware that interrupting such thought was unwise. "Sir," Love ventured at last, "about the people who disagreed with Mrs. Spindlethorpe. Shall we start with Councillor Judd?" Purbright gave a slight nod. His opposition to her projects was never subtle. When a man declares at a public meeting that a chairwoman is wasting the taxpayer's patience before correcting himself to money, one suspects there may be stronger sentiments beneath. They turned into Market Street, where the shop fronts appeared freshly polished by the gossip that had spread through the town since dawn. Even the marble busts in the undertaker's windows seemed to wear expressions of heightened curiosity. A group of women outside the bakery lowered their voices as the officers passed. though without sacrificing volume. And I heard she'd quarreled with the caterer only last week, demanded he remove all traces of paprika. They say she fainted dead away on top of her own speech, imagine. Poisoned, they're saying. In Flaxford. What next? Riot police. Purbright caught none of this directly, but the tone was enough. Flaxford was warming itself to the notion of murder with the enthusiasm of a cat discovering central heating. Their first call was Judd's business premises, a combined estate agency and insurance office so cramped with filing cabinets that one suspected the proprietor slept on top of one. Councillor Judd himself stood at the counter examining papers with the same discontent he applied to local governance. He was a square, red-faced man whose moustache appeared to have been trained to bristle at officialdom. "Morning, Inspector. Sergeant." He folded his arms. "If you've come about the late situation, I can tell you I wasn't surprised. Too much excitement. These cultural schemes of hers were pushing her beyond sensible limits." Purbright regarded him with the gentle interest of a naturalist who has encountered a familiar but noisy species. "You attended the gala, I believe?" "I did. Against my better judgment." Judd sniffed. "It was all too theatrical. And after 11, I kept saying it was bound to go wrong." "You left before the incident?" Purbright asked. "Just before midnight. My wife said the sandwiches were curling, and frankly I agreed. We were at home long before the commotion began. Neighbors will confirm it." Purbright did not doubt it. Alibis constructed with such brisk confidence were usually genuine or else carefully rehearsed, and Judd lacked the delicacy to rehearse anything subtle. "You and Mrs. Spindlethorpe had differing views about council expenditure," he said mildly. Judd's moustache bristled with new vigor. "We did, and I told her so, but I'm not the sort to, administer poison at a gala. If I'd wanted rid of her, Inspector, I'd have stood against her again in the elections. More efficient that way." Purbright thanked him and took his leave, having noted the man's tone with quiet satisfaction. Judd had been irritated but not agitated. His indignation rang with habit rather than guilt. Love, once they were outside, lowered his voice. He didn't seem nervous. "No," Purbright agreed. "Mr. Judd is usually at his most dangerous when calm." Their next visit took them to the Flaxford Public Library, a Victorian building that smelled strongly of disapproval and furniture polish. Miss Netta Cribbs, the librarian, met them at the desk with her customary severity. She resembled a tuning fork rendered human, thin, precise, and inclined to vibrate with offense. "I suppose you're investigating last night's catastrophe," she said. "Dreadful. Entirely predictable, of course. Mrs. Spindlethorpe had been meddling with the library's opening hours for weeks." "I understand there were differences of opinion," Purbright said. "Differences?" Miss Cribbs drew herself up. She wanted to force the library to stay open until 10, even on Thursdays. Thursdays, when I have my quiet needlework circle. She said late hours would modernize us. Modernize? As though providing literature isn't modern enough. Her voice trembled slightly, though whether from outrage or remembered affront was difficult to tell. "You attended the gala?" Purbright asked. "I did not. I made a point of declining. I told her I couldn't be expected to applaud such eccentric innovations. Midnight gatherings. Next, she'd have had us doing sunrise readings." "Did you see her recently?" "That depends what you mean by see. We exchanged words, brief ones, on Monday. She accused me of obstructing progress. I reminded her that progress is rarely assisted by ignorance." She paused, then added with thin dignity, "I do not poison people, Inspector, though I might occasionally wish to poison their ideas." Purbright believed her. Miss Cribbs's hostility was too direct, too pure to seek clandestine channels. If she had wished Mrs. Spindlethorpe harm, she would have written a strongly worded letter or organized a sternly silent protest, not resorted to chemistry. As they left the library, Love glanced back. "She's got a sharp tongue, sir." "Yes," Purbright said. "But tongues seldom kill unless they persuade someone else to act." He seemed about to add more when the station door opened and PC Doxy hurried out with the agitation of a man trying to contain more news than his uniform could hold. "Inspector, Dr. Swethan sent word. He's identified the substance." Purbright accepted the note Doxy offered, unfolded it, and read with a slight tightening of his brow. "Sir?" Love asked. "An alkaloid," Purbright said. "Quite obscure, but accessible to anyone with patience and an interest in horticulture." A thoughtful silence passed between them. "Horticulture," Love repeated. "That could be half the allotment society." "Indeed," Purbright murmured. "But perhaps not all equally." He turned toward the direction of the assembly rooms where the gala decor was still being dismantled by weary volunteers. "Come, Love. There is one person whose relationship with plants, and with the late Mrs. Spindlethorpe, was notably strained. It may be time we paid a call on Mr. Edgar Bloom." And as they set off, the faint breeze carried the unmistakable scent of late spring blossoms, the sort of fragrance that might conceal less welcome characteristics underneath, if one only knew where to look. Mr. Edgar Bloom lived at the far edge of Flaxford in a cottage that appeared to have been claimed by vegetation sometime in the late 1950s and only grudgingly allowed to house a person thereafter. The front gate sagged beneath a wreath of honeysuckle, and the path, originally gravel, had been transformed into a soft green corridor of moss. Bloom's garden, if garden it could still be called, rose on all sides in tangled, luxuriant profusion. What might have been beds of modest herbs had given way to a small jungle of plants that seemed quietly intent on escaping their pots. Bloom himself was kneeling among them, coaxing the leaves of a carnivorous-looking specimen with the tenderness usually reserved for infants. He glanced up as Purbright and Love approached, blinking mildly, as though emerging from some gentle but absorbing inner weather. "Ah," he said. "Police." His tone suggested the officers had arrived like an unexpected rainfall, unavoidable, faintly inconvenient, but not to be taken personally. "Is something damaged? Or someone?" Purbright inclined his head. "Mr. Bloom, we're calling in connection with the events at last night's Midnight Gala." Bloom straightened, brushing soil from his knees. He was a short, round man of the type that might have been sculpted from damp clay and forgotten near a window until he set. His spectacles were streaked with fine scratches and bits of leaf pressed to the corners of the frames. "I didn't attend," he said cheerfully. "Not my sort of thing. Midnight gatherings. Plants need their rest, same as anyone." "You were invited, though?" Purbright asked. "Oh, yes. Mrs. Spindlethorpe insisted. She always insisted. Wanted me to arrange an exhibition of rare species. I told her my specimens don't care for crowds." He chuckled faintly, then sobered. Terrible business. What happened? Love shifted uneasily. "Sir, do you mind if we ask a few questions about your interests?" "My interests," Bloom repeated, as though the word were a curious novelty. "Plants, mostly. Occasionally fungi. I've been studying certain families that people don't always appreciate." "Poisonous ones?" Love said cautiously. Bloom blinked again and then gave a faintly apologetic smile. "A few, but only academically. One must understand nature's less sociable representatives if one is to tend the friendlier ones properly." Purbright's gaze drifted across the thick foliage. Several plants had tags bearing Latin names that, even without translation, conveyed menace. "Dr. Swethan has identified the substance responsible for Mrs. Spindlethorpe's death," the inspector said. "It resembles something derived from certain ornamental shrubs. Ones not commonly grown, but occasionally prized by specialists." Bloom nodded thoughtfully. "There are such shrubs, but they're rare and difficult. I doubt anyone in Flaxford grows them except myself." Love cleared his throat. Did you ever quarrel with Mrs. Spindlethorpe about council business or anything else? Bloom pursed his lips, gazing past them as though searching for the politest possible phrasing. Mrs. Spindlethorpe did not understand plants, he said at last. She attempted to reorganize the floral festival last autumn, wanted shorter judging times, more categories, fewer unpleasantly obscure specimens. She said the competition needed to appeal to the general public. And you disagreed, Purbright prompted gently. Vehemently, Bloom said, with a strength that surprised even him. I told her plants are not ornaments for public amusement. They are living beings with preferences, temperaments. She said I was indulging sentimental nonsense. Love rubbed the back of his neck. Did you ever threaten her? Good heavens, no, Bloom replied. I may object to administrative incompetence, but I do so non-violently. The worst I ever did was resign from the festival committee. She tried to persuade me back, several times, in fact. Lavinia hated to lose a volunteer more than she hated to mislabel a dahlia. Purbright nodded slowly. You say you didn't attend the gala. May we ask where you were at the time? In my greenhouse, Bloom said without hesitation. Repotting a delicate hybrid. I was there from 10 until nearly 1. Plants don't wait for council decorum. Would you like to see them? The pots, I mean. Purbright smiled faintly. Another time, perhaps. Bloom folded his arms and looked mildly hurt, as though he had offered to show them a rare treasure and been politely dismissed. If you suspect me, Inspector, then I must tell you plainly that I have neither the inclination nor the temperament for murder. I barely have the temperament for neighborhood meetings. Purbright regarded him with quiet attention, noting the man's soft gestures, the deep affection with which he spoke of his plants, and the genuine bewilderment in his eyes. There was passion in Edgar Bloom, but it seemed directed inward, not outward, and passion alone did not make a murderer, though perhaps in the right circumstances, resentment might. Thank you, Purbright said. You've been very helpful. As they walked back toward the road, Love whispered, Do you think he did it, sir? Bloom, Purbright said. He has motive enough, irritation wounded by authority, but his nature suggests reluctance. Most people who handle poison professionally handle it with respect, not mischief. Then why the trouble with Mrs. Spindlethorpe? Love asked. Because, Purbright replied, she had a talent for provoking trouble. It is not the same as inspiring violence, but we shall see. They were halfway to town when a figure hurried toward them from the direction of the assembly rooms. Mrs. Penelope Coote, chairwoman of the Flaxford Ladies' Guild and custodian of any rumour considered too delicate for general distribution. Inspector Purbright, she called breathlessly, adjusting her hat. I've been looking everywhere. You need to know. Oh, it's simply ghastly. Purbright stopped with the patience of a man accustomed to Mrs. Coote's brand of urgency. What has happened? It's the buffet steward, she said in a tremulous whisper. Mr. Fallowby. He's disappeared. Vanished completely. Didn't go home last night, didn't open the community kitchen this morning, and, her voice dropped further, the caretakers found something behind the refreshment table. Purbright waited. A bottle, she said dramatically. An empty one, with a strange bitter smell, and no label. Love's eyebrows shot up. Sir, if someone tampered with the drinks, but Purbright was already turning, his expression very still. Mrs. Coote, he said gently, would you accompany us to the assembly rooms and be so good as to show us exactly where this bottle was found? She nodded fervently. And as they started back, Purbright's steps lengthened, not hurriedly, for he rarely hurried, but with the unmistakable purpose of a man who felt the investigation shifting beneath his feet, branching in a direction as quiet and as dangerous as any of Mr. Bloom's more exotic plants. The assembly rooms looked less festive in daylight, stripped of the fragile glamour that had flickered beneath last night's string of malfunctioning fairy lights. Volunteers moved about with solemn purpose, removing decorations with the air of pallbearers handling gaudy floral tributes. Mrs. Coote led Purbright and Love through the entrance hall, her heels tapping with a drama entirely unsuited to her otherwise round and bustling person. "It was just here," she whispered, as though the building itself were listening. Behind the refreshments table, tucked between a crate of glasses and that dreadful heap of bunting Mrs. Spindlethorpe insisted on ordering. The smell of sherry punch still clung faintly to the air, mingling with the stronger scent of floor polish. A few chairs lay upturned, as though the room had not fully recovered from having hosted an unexpected death. Purbright stepped around a pile of folded tablecloths and approached the space Mrs. Coote indicated. A small wooden crate stood half-concealed behind the buffet's linen skirting. Someone had attempted to tidy the area, but not thoroughly. A rag, a corkscrew, and a few sticky glasses remained. And there, lying on its side exactly where Mrs. Coote had said, was an empty bottle of dark green glass. The label had been removed, scraped cleanly, leaving only faint adhesive streaks. Purbright lifted it carefully with a handkerchief and tilted it toward the light. Even at a distance, the smell reached him, something sharp, almost medicinal, the sort of scent one might associate with an experimental liniment enthusiastically brewed in a shed. Love wrinkled his nose. "That's not wine, or sherry, or anything meant for drinking." Mrs. Coote shuddered and clasped her handbag closer. Mr. Fallowby must have known something. Why else would he disappear? And at his age, he hasn't missed a single morning opening in 20 years, not even when he sprained his ankle tripping over a crate of lentils. Purbright turned the bottle in his hand, watching the light glint off its surface. "Did you see Mr. Fallowby during the gala?" "Oh, yes," Mrs. Coote replied. "He was refilling glasses, wiping spills, fussing at people for wandering near the pudding table before the appropriate time. Quite himself, though I did notice he looked rather flustered whenever Mrs. Spindlethorpe approached." Love scribbled this down. "Flustered how, exactly?" "He'd go pink and start polishing things that were already shiny. I assumed it was nerves. Lavinia had that effect on those beneath her organizational standards." Mrs. Coote paused delicately, which was most people. Purbright replaced the bottle carefully where he had found it, though now wrapped in his own handkerchief. "Mrs. Coote," he said, "may I ask, did you observe anything unusual about the drinks table last night? Anyone hovering nearby? Anyone who perhaps seemed reluctant to be seen?" Her brow furrowed in concentration. "The caterer, Mr. Quince, was there early on, but he left well before midnight. Mrs. Yarrow was ladling punch with unnecessary fervour. Young Timothy Pike knocked over a plate of eclairs, and, oh yes, Mr. Fallowby stepped away several times." "Stepped away?" Love asked. "To the back corridor. Only a minute or two each time. I assumed he was fetching supplies." She frowned. "Though now I think of it." He returned, looking rather pale. Purbright nodded. "And no one else?" "Well," she hesitated, adjusting her hat again. "There was Mrs. Melliford. She lingered near the table quite a bit. Said she was looking for her spectacles case. I suggested she try using the spectacles on her nose, but she didn't appreciate the remark." Love gave Purbright a questioning glance, but the inspector simply closed the handkerchief around the bottle and straightened. "Thank you, Mrs. Coote. You've been very helpful." The woman beamed, as though official recognition of her helpfulness might be recorded in the town minutes. When she finally departed, after reiterating 3 times that she hoped the police would use every resource necessary, even London ones, Purbright and Love moved toward the side corridor behind the refreshments area. "Sir," Love murmured, "if Fallowby was handling the drinks, he might have had access to whatever poisoned Mrs. Spindlethorpe. But why run? If he were guilty, wouldn't disappearing draw more attention?" "Not necessarily," Purbright replied. "Guilt often believes it can outrun suspicion. Fear, on the other hand, makes people vanish just as effectively." They reached the narrow passage where Mrs. Coote claimed Fallowby had repeatedly disappeared. It smelled faintly of damp plaster and aging wood. A broom leaned against the wall. A stack of crates stood at the far end beside a closed door marked kitchen storage. Purbright tried the handle. It turned reluctantly, creaking open to reveal a dim room cluttered with boxes, metal pans, jars of preserves used during community events, and an astonishing number of mismatched serving trays. A single small window provided the only light. The place was orderly enough, save for one detail: a chair positioned directly beneath the window, as if someone had recently stood upon it to look or climb outside. Love tapped the frame. "Windows unlatched, sir." Purbright peered out. The drop wasn't steep, leading only to a patch of gravel near the building's rear exit. "Someone left in a hurry," he said quietly. "You think it was Fallowby?" Love asked. "The chair suggests haste, but whether it was fear or guilt that propelled him, I can't yet say." Love sighed. "We should start looking for him." "We shall," Purbright said, "but we will also speak with the caterer. Mr. Quince may recall more about the preparations." He paused, adding, "And I'd like a quiet word with Mrs. Melliford, who seems curiously accident-prone with spectacles." As they exited the storage room, Purbright stopped, noticing a faint smear on the inside of the window frame. Something dark, almost reddish-brown. He touched it lightly with a fingertip, then lifted the trace to the light. "Blood, sir?" Love asked. "Perhaps," Purbright murmured. "Or something equally inconvenient." Love looked uneasy. If Fallowby climbed out, he might be hurt. "Or hurried," Purbright said. "Or frightened." He folded his hands behind his back, thoughtful. "Love, arrange for a discreet search of the surrounding streets. Quietly, if you please. I'd like Mr. Fallowby found before he convinces himself of the need to vanish entirely." Love nodded and set off briskly. Purbright remained a moment longer, gazing toward the storage room and then back to the hall where the remnants of the gala lay scattered. Pieces were emerging, slowly but with enough insistence to disturb the surface calm of Flaxford. A missing steward, an unlabeled bottle, a smear on a window frame. And behind it all, the lingering impression of a woman who inspired loyalty in some, irritation in many, and perhaps something darker in at least one. Purbright closed the door softly, as though not wishing to disturb whatever faint clue might still be listening inside. Love returned to the station shortly after 2:00, with the expression of a man who had found something he would rather not have been looking for. Purbright, at his desk with a stack of statements, looked up as the sergeant hovered in the doorway. "Well?" he asked. "We've found Mr. Fallowby, sir," Love said. "Or rather, he more or less found us. He walked into the co-op, saw the morning paper with Mrs. Spindlethorpe's picture on the front, and fainted into a display of tinned peaches." "Is he injured?" "Only his pride. I've put him in interview 2. He keeps saying it's all a terrible misunderstanding, and could he please sit near a window." Interview 2 was the smallest of the station's rooms, with a table and an atmosphere that discouraged imaginative lying. Mr. Fallowby sat hunched on the edge of his chair, clutching his hat. His mustache looked as though it had once entertained ambitions of grandeur but had resigned itself to mediocrity. "Mr. Fallowby," Purbright said pleasantly, taking the opposite chair, "you have caused the town a good deal of interest." "I never meant to," Fallowby blurted. "It's just, well, people start pointing and whispering, and next thing you know you're missing. I only went to my sister's in Fenning." "Last night appears to have been complicated," Purbright observed. "Tell me about the refreshments." Fallowby's hands tightened on his hat. "I laid out the glasses, sir, and uncorked the wine, what there was of it. Mrs. Spindlethorpe said we mustn't be extravagant. Mostly it was punch. I mixed it from the recipe she gave me. Fruit juice, a splash of sherry, a dash of something foreign she'd bought specially. She said it came from a continental grocer." "Did you see the bottle?" Purbright asked. "Yes, sir. Dark green, long neck, label with foreign writing, all swirls and accents. She wouldn't let me handle it. Said it was her contribution. Love glanced at Purbright, but we found an unlabeled bottle behind the buffet. Fallowby shook his head. Not the same, sir. That horrid thing wasn't there when I set up. I'd have noticed the smell, like medicine gone wrong. It must have been brought later. You left the refreshments table several times, Purbright said, to the back corridor. I had to fetch more glasses, Fallowby protested, and ice, and once I went to the gents. You can ask Mrs. Coote. She was hovering over the sausage rolls like a hawk. You didn't climb out of any windows? Windows? His eyes bulged. Good Lord, no. I might be panicked, Inspector, but I'm not athletic. Purbright considered this, then changed direction. Why did Mrs. Spindlethorpe make you nervous? Fallowby swallowed. She was very particular, always telling me the ladles should be held at a 45-degree angle, said presentation mattered. Last night she kept coming back to check the punch bowl, asked who'd been near it. I told her, no one but me and Mrs. Yarrow, and she only dipped a finger to test it. Lavinia said she was depending on me not to spoil her vision. Did anyone else show unusual interest? Purbright asked. Fallowby hesitated. Well, Mr. Quince, the caterer, came behind the table once, said he'd left a crate or two there, but he went off early. Mrs. Melliford kept fussing about losing something, and Mr. Bloom stood near the far end for a while, looking at the flower arrangements as if they'd offended him, but he didn't touch the drinks. And when Mrs. Spindlethorpe collapsed, Fallowby shuddered. I was topping up the bowl. She took a glass and went up to the microphone. Next thing, she went all soft. I thought she'd swoon and everyone would blame the heating. But when she didn't move, he faltered. People were staring at me, sir, at the punch bowl. So when they sent for the ambulance, I tidied the mess and slipped out the back. I know it looks bad, but I've never so much as watered the whiskey in my life. Purbright watched him for a moment. Mr. Fallowby, did you ever read or write anonymous letters? The man looked offended. Certainly not. If I've something to say, I say it, or I don't say it at all. Anonymous letters are for people who can't spell. Quite, Purbright said. Thank you. For now, remain available. Don't go to your sisters without letting us know. When Fallowby had been escorted out, Love turned to his superior. He had every opportunity, sir. And that story about Mrs. Spindlethorpe's special bottle, if it existed, how come we haven't found it? Because, Purbright said, someone may have taken pains that we should not, or because it never contained what she believed. Love frowned. You think she was tricked? I think, Purbright replied, that if one wishes to poison a cautious woman, one does best to use a vessel she trusts, something she chose herself, or believed she had. He reached into a drawer and took out the torn corner of paper he had kept from the pile of gala correspondence. A scrap bearing Mrs. Spindlethorpe's bold handwriting, the words "Special Tonic from Mr." cut off abruptly. The fragment had been troubling him. Love peered. From Mr. Who, sir? That, said Purbright, folding the paper away again, is a question I propose to ask people this afternoon, starting with those who like to offer the town little improvements in bottles. Purbright did not explain little improvements in bottles, and Love, who had learned that questions ripened best on their own, walked beside him in silence until they stepped into Dapple and Son Chemists. Mr. Peregrine Dapple emerged from behind a display of indigestion tablets with the air of a man willing to cooperate, provided nobody suggested he stocked anything exciting. This is about Mrs. Spindlethorpe, I suppose, he said. It is, Purbright replied. We're interested in anything she bought from you recently, particularly in bottles. Dapple fetched a ledger. Her purchases were quite ordinary. Vitamin tonics, lozenges, a laxative. Ah, here. A week ago, 4 ounces of glycerin and 12 empty brown bottles. Did she say what for? Love asked. Favors for the Midnight Gala, Dapple said. Small take-home cordials. She said people like to leave with something in their hands. I advised simplicity. She told me a gentleman had already helped her with a recipe having botanical authenticity. A doctor? Purbright asked. I gathered not. When I suggested Mr. Bloom, she laughed and said this advisor was a more modern sort of plant man and understood presentation and branding. I assumed that meant labels. You supplied nothing else, Purbright said. Nothing at all, Dapple replied. If she wanted herbs, she got them elsewhere. I prefer my customers living and upright. Outside, Love said, so she had bottles and a mystery expert. That fits with Fallowby's story about a foreign-looking bottle she wouldn't let him handle. It also fits, Purbright said, with poison placed where only she would pour it. A station car drew alongside. P.C. Doxey leaned out. Message from Dr. Swithin, sir. He's at Mrs. Melliford's. Says, could you come if convenient? She's had a turn after drinking what she says is leftover punch from the gala. Convenient enough, Purbright said. Take us there. Mrs. Melliford's sitting room smelled of polish. She lay on the sofa with a shawl. Dr. Swithin sat near a low table on which stood a jam jar, half full of cloudy liquid. She is in no immediate danger, he said. A brief faint and some discomfort. I attribute much of it to the imagination. You never say anything soothing, Mrs. Melliford murmured. I save that for serious cases, Swithin replied. Purbright nodded toward the jar. This came from the gala. I brought it home at the end, she said. They were going to throw it away. I took a jarful. I had one sip just now and felt queer. Naturally, I assumed the worst. I've taken a sample, Swithin said. If there is poison, it is not much. Her symptoms bear little resemblance to Mrs. Spindlethorpe's. You were seen near the refreshments several times, Purbright said. I was looking for my spectacles, she answered, which, yes, were hanging round my neck. While you were there, Purbright went on, did you notice anyone paying unusual attention to the drinks or to any bottles? She frowned. Mrs. Spindlethorpe, of course. She hovered. Poor Mr. Fallowby jumped whenever she spoke. Mr. Quince came behind the table muttering about supplies, and there was a thin man I didn't know, pale, dark hair. I saw him in the corridor to the kitchen with a tray. I never saw him serving anyone in the hall. He always seemed just to have gone or about to arrive. Did Mrs. Spindlethorpe ever mention a special cordial? Purbright asked. Something bottled for guests. Oh, yes, Mrs. Melliford said. She told me a gentleman had helped design an authentic nightcap with botanical interest. When I guessed Mr. Bloom, she said no. This one was a modern plant man and understood marketing. Did she give his name? Purbright asked. No. She liked having secrets on committees. Swithin stood up and closed his bag. I'll take the jar and what remains, he said. If there is anything dangerous in it, we should know. If not, I shall recommend strong tea. When he had gone, Love said, if that really is the same punch as last night, sir, it doesn't look very murderous. Exactly, Purbright said. If the general bowl was as mild as this, then Mrs. Spindlethorpe's danger lay elsewhere, something only she drank. The cordial from her own bottle, Love said. Someone could have altered just one. Or exchanged it, Purbright said. She would pour from it with confidence and perhaps encourage others to do the same. If no one else did, that would not be the poison's fault. Love grimaced. We need that modern plant man and the thin fellow with the tray. We do, Purbright agreed. Ask Mr. Quince for the names of everyone he engaged to help at the gala, especially anyone matching that description. Then call on the new Health and Harmony shop by the bus stop. Anyone who sells health in bottles is unlikely to be shy about his expertise, Love said. They've been pushing leaflets through my door for weeks. I should like to know whether Mrs. Spindlethorpe found his ideas as palatable as he claims they are. The terrace outside lay quiet, its curtains composed and watchful. In a town this size, Purbright remarked, New faces are supposed to arrive arm in arm with someone we already know. Our thin friend has appeared only with a tray. Until we learn who invited him, I think we may regard him as the wrong improvement in the wrong place." He did not disagree. The Health and Harmony shop looked as though it had been decorated by someone determined to appear tranquil while harboring intense commercial ambition. Pale green walls, jars of powders with names that sounded faintly apologetic, and a wooden mobile of dangling leaves that revolved just slowly enough to imply moral superiority. Behind the counter stood a man who fit Mrs. Melliford's vague description rather well. Thin, pale, dark hair swept back as if retreating from responsibility. His shirt sleeves were rolled with the fastidiousness of someone who distrusted wrinkles. He brightened as Purbright and Love entered, clasping his hands with evangelical enthusiasm. "Gentlemen, welcome to Health and Harmony, Flaxford's new gateway to vitality. I'm Rowan Leeks, proprietor, consultant, and wellness facilitator. How may I nurture you today?" Purbright regarded him as one might regard an unfamiliar fruit, curious but cautious about unexpected effects. "Mr. Leeks," he said mildly, "we're making inquiries into the events at the Midnight Gala." Leeks's expression rearranged itself into what he likely thought was sympathetic solemnity. Tragic. Absolutely tragic. Poor Mrs. Spindlethorpe. I attempted to introduce her to my mindful mince infusion, but she said it clashed with something called the civic taste palette. Hardly surprising she was so tense. "Did you attend the gala?" Love asked. "I provided samples," Leeks said, brightening again. "Small wellness tonics, a complimentary contribution in the spirit of community. I gave Mrs. Spindlethorpe a selection." "Did she accept them?" Purbright asked. "Oh, yes. Well, she accepted them but insisted they be decanted into what she called uniform presentation vessels. She brought in her own little brown bottles. Said they must match the gala aesthetic." Purbright felt a faint inward shift, something aligning with the scrap of paper he had kept, and Fallowby's comment about the bottle she wouldn't let him touch. "And you filled those bottles yourself?" he asked. "Some," Leeks said. "She took the rest away to do at home. I gave her a mixture, herbal restoratives, anxiolytics, digestive stabilizers, all perfectly safe, unless one were to misuse them, which of course one wouldn't." "What did the mixtures contain?" Purbright asked. "Oh, roots and extracts from reputable suppliers. And a few I prepare myself. I trained in holistic botanic therapy, not the traditional kind. Modern principles. Detoxification, vibrational alignment." Love looked faintly alarmed. "And where do you keep these mixtures?" "Special cupboard?" Leeks pointed proudly to a locked cabinet. "I keep anything potent well out of reach, completely harmless in the right hands." "The wrong ones," Purbright suggested gently. Leeks cleared his throat. Anyone unfamiliar with dosage could make themselves quite unwell, but Mrs. Spindlethorpe was very particular. She followed instructions. "Did she discuss these tonics with anyone else?" Purbright asked. "She said she might incorporate one into her gala refreshments," Leeks replied. "Something unique for guests. She was terribly excited. She said Flaxford needed invigorating." Purbright nodded. "Mr. Leeks, would you mind providing a list of ingredients for all mixtures you supplied to Mrs. Spindlethorpe?" "Of course, anything to help. The police ought to know precisely what is happening within their community. Health is a delicate ecosystem." Purbright accepted the printed sheet Leeks handed over. The list was a verbose celebration of roots, peels, and extracts, most benign, some unfamiliar. One entry caught his attention. "Night root elixir, microdose only, potent." He underlined it lightly with his thumb, but made no comment. "Mr. Leeks," he said, "on the night of the gala, were you anywhere near the assembly rooms?" Leeks stiffened. "I was here, doing inventory, alone, but I have receipts time-stamped if needed." "We may request them," Purbright said kindly. For now, thank you. Outside, Love muttered, Sir, that man could poison a football team by mistake. Possibly, Purbright murmured, but not without boasting about the ingredients afterwards. They had reached the station before Love's notebook vibrated faintly with the urgency of someone seeking attention. PC Doxy again, hurrying across the forecourt. Urgent message, sir. Mr. Quince the caterer is asking for you at once. Says he's remembered something important. Quince's catering shop was a narrow-fronted business with ambitions larger than its premises. Pies cooled in the window with a sort of resentful dignity. Inside, Quince paced like a man negotiating a particularly obstinate soufflé. Inspector, he said as soon as they entered. I've been thinking. Couldn't sleep last night. Something was odd. Very odd. Purbright sat on a stool that threatened collapse. Tell me. It's about the man with the tray, Quince said. I didn't hire him. Love blinked. But Mrs. Melliford saw him in the kitchen corridor, and others noticed someone moving between rooms. I saw him too, Quince said. Tallish, thin, dark hair, smart enough clothes, carrying a serving tray as if he belonged. Only he didn't. I never saw him when the staff started. And when I did see him later, he didn't answer when I asked him to fetch cutlery. Just walked off as if he hadn't heard. Purbright leaned forward. So he wasn't part of your team, yet moved freely backstage? Yes, Quince said, and he kept appearing near Mrs. Spindlethorpe's end of the hall. Did she seem to know him? Purbright asked. Hard to say. She was flitting about too much, but... Quince hesitated. This is the bit that's been needling me. After she collapsed, I went backstage. That man was gone. Vanished, like he'd walked straight out the back and melted into the street. Love frowned deeply. Sir, could he have switched the bottle? If Mrs. Spindlethorpe had one specially reserved for her cordial. Purbright's voice was very quiet. Someone who knew she would be carrying her own bottle, someone who could handle a tray convincingly enough to be invisible, someone confident, calm, and unfamiliar enough to avoid instant recognition. He rose. Love, get a description circulated, quietly, and ask Mr. Spindlethorpe whether his late wife consulted any botanical advisors recently beyond Mr. Leeks. And if he didn't know, Love asked, then we must discover who did. Love hesitated. Sir, do you think the anonymous letter writer is the same person? Purbright looked toward the window where afternoon light slid across the floor in a patient, investigative beam. I think, he said, that Flaxford has two kinds of people, those who disliked Mrs. Spindlethorpe loudly, and those who disliked her silently. The silent ones always interest me more. Love nodded. Then the thin man. Is a silence, Purbright finished, one that moved through a crowd, carried a tray, and left no name behind. For now. Evening settled over Flaxford with the quiet of a town that knew it had overdone things. Lamplight came on along Market Street in orderly sequence. In his office, Inspector Purbright sat with his chair tipped back a fraction and his hands loosely clasped. Before him, spread across the desk, lay notes, Mrs. Spindlethorpe's speech, Mr. Spindlethorpe's anonymous letter, Bloom's indignation, Fallowby's panic, Mrs. Melliford's faint, Mr. Leeks's ingredients list, Quince's memory of the thin man. Love, on the visitor's chair with a mug of tea cooling, watched the inspector's gaze pass from sheet to sheet. It doesn't quite fit, does it, sir? He ventured. Oh, it fits, Purbright replied. But like a badly altered suit, there is a proper arrangement. We have not yet found the right wearer. We've got more than enough people who didn't like Mrs. Spindlethorpe, Love said. Judd, Miss Cribbs, Mr. Bloom, Fallowby, Leeks, and this fellow with the tray. Dislike is cheap, Purbright said mildly. He picked up the scrap of paper torn from Mrs. Spindlethorpe's planning pile and read again the half-sentence. Special tonic from Mr. It still bothers you, that bit? Love asked. It does, Purbright admitted. Mr. Leeks is proud of his trade name. He would want health and harmony wherever ink could be persuaded to go. This is simple, Mr., and then a familiar start to a name she never finished. That suggests someone she knew first as a person, and only afterwards as a provider of bottles. Bloom, Love said, she knew him through flowers, might have asked him for something to calm her down. Possible, Purbright said, but she described her modern plant man with a flourish. Mr. Bloom is many things, but modern is not among them. And Dr. Swithin tells me the alkaloid we are dealing with is not one of his favorites. Then we're back to Leeks, Love said. His night root elixir sounds enough like poison dressed for Sunday. Leeks has the means, Purbright agreed. But he volunteered it eagerly and nailed his name to it. It would be unlike him to arrange a murder that did not also advertise the shop. He laid the papers flat. What interests me more, he went on, is the manner of the crime. Not a quarrel in a dark lane, but a carefully arranged death in a hall full of witnesses. A performance. Someone wanted the town not only deprived of Mrs. Spindlethorpe, but to see her fall from the very dais she had erected. Our murderer planned place, timing, and audience, he added. Only one glass, at a moment when no one would think it odd that she should drink. And the general punch? Love asked. Dr. Swithin says Mrs. Melliford's jar was hardly dangerous. Exactly. If the punch was harmless, the peril lay in what Mrs. Spindlethorpe added to her own. A cordial, perhaps, or tonic she believed to be hers. He tapped the scrap of paper. She expected a tonic from Mr. Someone provided it. Either they sent her something lethal, or someone later altered what she had. In either case, there is a person who knew she would trust a bottle from that source. We still don't know who that is, Love said. Or this thin fellow with the tray. Not yet, but whoever carried that tray had the right sort of nerve. New to the town, but apparently at home in the corridors. I think we might make use of that. Love looked wary. Sir, we shall hold a little gathering, Purbright said. A post-mortem on the gala, social rather than medical. Ask Mrs. Coote to arrange a debrief in the assembly rooms tomorrow evening. Officially, we wish to hear suggestions for future events. Unofficially, we wish to put a number of people in the same room and say one or two things that may disturb digestion. Who do we invite? The obvious. Judd, Miss Cribbs, Bloom, Fallowby, Mrs. Melliford, Mr. Quince, Mr. Leeks. If he can bear to be parted from his vibrations, Mrs. Yarrow and any others Mrs. Coote considers indispensable. Make the invitations sound flattering. And when we've got them there, Love persisted. We let them talk, Purbright said. Then, at a suitable moment, I shall mention that we have made excellent progress in tracing the origin of the poison, that Dr. Swithin is preparing a report, and that we have recommended an exhumation, should any doubt remain. Love stared. Exhumation, sir. It is a word with curious effects, Purbright said. Innocence finds it distasteful. Guilt experiences it rather more personally. So we watch to see who looks personal, Love said. Something of the sort. Love rose, gathering his notebook. I'll speak to Mrs. Coote. She'll enjoy being indispensable. Break it gently, Purbright advised. If you tell her the police require her help, she may attempt to wear all her best hats at once. When the sergeant had gone, Purbright crossed to the window and looked down at the dim street. Here and there curtains were drawn. Behind others, lights glowed faintly. Somewhere among them, he reflected, someone was rehearsing calm phrases for tomorrow evening, telling themselves no one could possibly connect this bottle with that walk down a corridor. The meeting in the assembly rooms would bring voices and opinions. More usefully, it would expose reactions. It would show him how people behaved when someone lit the edges of their folded secrets. The following evening, the assembly rooms had been returned to their usual, faintly disapproving self. The bunting and fairy lights were gone. In their place stood 3 short rows of chairs and a trestle table with a large urn of tea that looked as though it would permit no nonsense. Mrs. Coote hovered behind it, cheeks pink, arranging biscuits with the care of a woman who felt history might remember this plate. Inspector Purbright stood near the back and watched people arrive. Councillor Judd came first, heavy and indignant, as if the meeting had been imposed on him personally by Whitehall. Miss Cribbs followed, lips thin, clearly of the opinion that anything described as a debrief was unlikely to be properly indexed. Edgar Bloom slipped in carrying a small potted geranium, which he placed on the window-sill with an apologetic little pat. Mr. Spindlethorpe entered in a dark suit that made him look smaller. Mrs. Melliford appeared in a cloud of perfume and concern. Mr. Quince wore his catering apron like a statement. Fallowby chose a chair near the wall and began quietly bending his hat brim out of shape. Rowan Leeks of Health and Harmony came punctually with a folder under his arm and the expression of a man prepared to introduce yoga if invited to say a few words. Behind him came the lesser local figures. Mrs. Yarrow, 2 committee men who seemed to have been run off the same press, Mrs. Yates from the post office. Last, almost unnoticed, arrived a tall, narrow man in a neat, dark suit. He paused. For a moment in the doorway, eyes moving once around the room with a light, measuring glance, then sat near the side door, where a person might reasonably leave without treading on too many toes. Sergeant Love, placed where he could see both circle and exit, registered the new arrival, and also the slight stiffening of Mrs. Yarrow when he sat beside her. His notebook stayed in his pocket, but his attention folded itself more neatly. Mrs. Coote opened proceedings. "On behalf of the Gala Committee," she said, "I thank you all for coming. We felt it right to meet and reflect after the dreadful events of Thursday. Flaxford does not hide from lessons." She inclined her head toward the inspector. "We are honored that Inspector Purbright can be with us." Purbright inclined his own, as if accepting a second cup he had not ordered. "I am here," he said, "to listen and to correct, so far as possible, some of the more energetic rumors. We know that Mrs. Spindlethorpe died because a toxic substance entered her system. We also know that it was not present in harmful quantity in the general punch or food. Those who have risked the leftovers may, within reason, relax." There was a small stir near Mrs. Melliford, and a dry cough from the direction of Fallowby. "The poison," Purbright continued, "appears to have been introduced by way of something only she drank. A cordial or tonic she believed to be to her advantage. She spoke of a special addition to the gala. Some of you may have heard her mention it." Mr. Spindlethorpe cleared his throat. "She said a gentleman had helped her design a proper civic nightcap," he said. "Something with a bit of health in it. I assumed she meant the new health shop man." He nodded vaguely in Leeks's direction. The eyes of the room turned with practiced obedience. Leeks managed an injured, reasonable look. "I did provide certain mixtures," he said. "All quite safe, Inspector. I could show you the measures. I've never supplied anything that would seriously inconvenience a coroner." "Dr. Swithin's analysis," Purbright said, "supports Mr. Leeks. The principal poison did not come from his shelves. It appears instead to derive from a rather capricious ornamental shrub. Preparations from it are normally confined to specialists and enthusiastic amateurs with strong nerves." His gaze rested for a moment on Edgar Bloom. The planton colored slightly, but his voice was steady. "I grow and I study," he said. "I do not distribute." "I do not say you do," Purbright answered. "I merely observe that someone used that sort of knowledge, whether their own or borrowed." He allowed silence to receive this, then added in much the same tone, "You will also wish to know what further steps are being taken. Dr. Swithin is preparing a full report for the Home Office. If, when it is complete, any reasonable doubt remains, I have advised that exhumation would remove it. Modern methods can detect, with some accuracy, what entered a body and, on occasion, how, even where the bottle involved has long since gone for a walk. The word exhumation travelled round the circle like a cool draught. Mrs. Melliford gave a soft gasp. Mrs. Coote said, "Good gracious," with a satisfaction she could not entirely disguise. One of the committee men crossed himself, then looked faintly ashamed. Quince shifted. Fallowby's fingers tightened until his hat brim creaked. Bloom stared fixedly at his geranium. Leaks's lips parted, then closed again. Near the side door, the tall man moved 1 foot imperceptibly towards the aisle and kept his gaze on the floor. Love, whose face had settled into polite blandness, felt 3 little jolts run through the room and stored their shape away. He let the silence settle again. Inspector Purbright let the silence deepen until it grew into a thing with texture, something that pressed gently yet unmistakably upon every person in the room. Only then did he speak again, his tone conversational, almost kindly. "You see," he said, "much of this investigation has concerned timing. Who walked where and when? Who handled what and for how long? A poison delivered in a crowded hall is no simple feat. It requires precision and, more importantly, opportunity." He turned his head just slightly as though surveying a hedge for early blossom. One person at the gala had that opportunity in abundance, someone who moved freely behind the refreshments table without attracting questions. Someone who carried trays, stepped through service corridors, entered and exited rooms as though his presence were expected. A ripple of unease passed along the chairs. "That person," Purbright continued, "was not hired by Mr. Quince, nor recognized by any other staff, yet several of you saw him." The pale gentleman with the tray. The tall man near the side door shifted. Not much, just enough for the chair's leg to make a tiny scrape. Purbright nodded to it, as if acknowledging a polite greeting. "Mr. Quince spoke of you walking away when addressed. Mrs. Melliford saw you in the corridor, never actually serving anyone. And I imagine Mr. Fallowby realized, too late, that you were not one of his helpers when you took the only moment in which his back was turned." Fallowby made a small, pained noise. The tall man's eyes flicked once toward him. Purbright went on gently. "You made 2 contributions to the gala, sir. The first was to replace the cordial Mrs. Spindlethorpe had prepared with one of your own. It was clever. You allowed her to believe she was pouring from her special bottle, her uniform presentation vessel. You laid your mixture ready on a tray in the corridor. When she asked for it, she thought she was receiving what she had planned." He paused. "She was, in a sense, a cordial, just not hers." "Inspector," the tall man began, a thread of dryness in his voice. But Purbright raised a hand. "Your second contribution was vanishing, a modest exit requiring neither force nor speed. Out the storage room window, stepping on a chair that still remembers you. A neat trick, but you see, when a person glides through a hall unnoticed, one must ask, who would do that well, who has practice at going unremarked?" Purbright allowed the room to make its slow turn toward the man. "You are Mr. Darnell, I believe," Purbright said at last. "Late assistant to Mrs. Spindlethorpe on the planning committee for the autumn exhibition. Employed briefly, then dismissed, quietly, for what she described as creative differences of an administrative nature." The man's jaw tightened. "She accused me," he said quietly, "of falsifying visitor numbers. I did no such thing. I suspect," Purbright went on, "that she accused you of other matters as well. Matters she said she might bring before the council. Threats about your future employment. Hard talk of reputations, and hers weighed considerably more in Flaxford." A murmur passed through the group. Mr. Spindlethorpe looked stunned. "You knew," Purbright said, "that she would present her civic tonic proudly. You knew she had boasted of obtaining advice from a modern plant man, a description you rather liked, I fancy. You recommended ingredients under that guise. You even helped her select her bottles. She trusted your guidance, up to the moment she dismissed you." Darnell's eyes glimmered, but he said nothing. "But revenge," Purbright continued softly, rarely ends where one expects. You planned everything except your own role in the room. You assumed you could fade among strangers as easily as you faded among tasks. But Flaxford notices the unfamiliar. The town does not tolerate foreign elements, even if they wear a tray. He stepped forward. You tried to make the death appear as self-inflicted by her own enthusiasm, a tonic too strong, a recipe misjudged, but there was something you failed to anticipate. Darnell swallowed. "And what is that, Inspector?" Purbright's voice became almost sympathetic. "That Flaxford talks, and it notices, and sometimes it remembers a face that ought not to be at a midnight gala at all." Love stepped beside the inspector. "Mr. Darnell," he said quietly, "I must ask you to come with us." For a moment, the tall man seemed about to protest, but something in the room, perhaps the way Mrs. Coote bristled with righteous vindication or the way Edgar Bloom's geranium leaned sorrowfully against the glass, seemed to persuade him otherwise. His shoulders lowered. His hands opened in a gesture halfway between surrender and resignation. "I didn't mean her to suffer," he murmured. "Only to stop." Purbright regarded him with gentle gravity. "People seldom mean the whole of what they do," he said. "Nevertheless, they do it." Darnell was escorted out. The door closed behind him with a soft finality that the room seemed unwilling to break. Mrs. Melliford dabbed her eyes. Fallowby exhaled shakily. Mrs. Coote, who had begun the evening with biscuits and optimism, now wore the expression of a woman who had personally prevented a revolution. Purbright cleared his throat. "If I may offer one last observation," he said, "it is that Flaxford does not thrive on midnight galas. It thrives on daylight, on neighborly quarrels, and on matters settled at a civil hour. I would suggest that future events begin and end rather earlier." This earned a subdued ripple of agreement. "And now," he added gently, "if you will excuse me, I have paperwork." He left the assembly rooms quietly, stepping into a night that smelled faintly of damp cobblestone and the comforting normalcy of a town returning to itself. The investigation was concluded. No triumph, no spectacle, only the slow resumption of routine, which Purbright always considered the truest victory. He walked back toward the station, hands loosely tucked behind him, thinking, as he often did, that human nature had a remarkable capacity for tangling itself into trouble, and an equally remarkable capacity, once nudged, for finding its way out again. The lamps flickered. The town settled. Somewhere, a cat jumped onto a windowsill with the certainty that the world was once more predictable. Inspector Purbright smiled faintly into the quiet.